When we talk about the toxic mother-daughter relationship, or the toxic idea of even a toxic Black mother in general, that if you are the child in that situation, you should not be walking out thinking that you were the cause, thinking that you were the reason why your mother was the person that she was. Hey guys, it's Julesy and I am back for another video. We're actually doing a take 2 on this one because we are addressing a very sensitive topic, and I just wanted to make sure that I was being respectful to the topic at hand and how it may impact different people. But I am very excited to be here. So, I had to get cute for you. Don't know how much in 2022 I'm going to be able to keep this up, but we give it some effort this year. All right, we come with some looks this year. And grad school is back in full swing. I actually just gave my first academic talk today. So stressful, but shout out to Audible for helping a young girl, babe, about to be 37, a whole woman, for having a young woman out, because as I've said before and time again, I love finding my academic texts on Audible. So many of the books that I'm going to be referencing in this discussion, because this is going to be book heavy. You better get your Audible libraries ready, because the audiobook versions of them are all available on Audible. And along with that, Audible has just a wide and amazing selection of audiobooks to listen to. They also have original audiobooks, podcasts, a whole bunch of stuff. And you definitely need to come on over to the Audible side, because this pandemic stretching on. Life is a little stressful. And every way to read counts as reading. That includes audiobooks. So shout out to Audible for bringing me here with this video and also helping me to get through grad school. And if you are new to Audible, be sure to use my Audible link. You can click the link below down in the description box, audible.com/Julesy, or text Julesy to 500 and get your first month free. Thanks again, y'all. So as I already said, get your Audible libraries ready, because I am going to be referencing so many various texts in this video. And this is a topic that I have long been asked to cover, and I've just been hesitant, because it's not my own personal experience with my own mother, but because so many people have asked me and I wanted to put some thought in it, I actually discussed my hesitancy in an Instagram live that is now reposted on my Patreon. More exclusive content, patreon.com/Julesy. Come on over to the cool side. And I realized in that discussion that while my own relationship with my mother is very healthy, I wouldn't describe it as toxic at all. I wouldn't describe my mother as toxic at all. When I think of my grandmothers, both my paternal and my maternal grandmother, both of my grandmothers were born in 1925. Grandma Shirley was born in Harlem, New York. My grandma Charlotte was born in Polk County, Florida. And, this is a time coming out of the Great Depression and, rather close, in all things considered, to post-emancipation. Their own mothers are part of the first generation of Black people born free collectively in this country, and just struggling in a time where what were the options, what were the dreams that Black women were allowed to have, and how that shaped the way both of my grandmothers, their mothers, pursued both womanhood and motherhood. I know you're like, what's this got to do with the actual topic of the toxic mother-daughter relationship that many of you have asked me to discuss? And, I think there always has to be a historical perspective to this, because when I think of this topic, I think, what is unique, right? What is unique about how Black women engage in toxic behavior as mothers? And I do believe that requires a historical preview, because every aspect that is unique to Black mothers is colored by how gender identity and the ideology of woman and motherhood were created in the Western world. And when we consider the ideology of Black motherhood and gender identity or womanhood, this was structured around slavery and colonization for almost the entirety of the African diaspora. I know, as an African American, as someone who's an American history grad student, I'm going to center this conversation from the perspective of an American Black woman. But I do understand that this idea and a lot of the things that make this unique within the context of a Black identity are not singularly about the African American experience. There is a lot of crossover here because in America, we had the forced reproduction of enslaved Black people, which commodified the Black woman's reproductive system. And then because of the heavy reliance on forced reproduction, where about 400,000 Africans were forcefully migrated into the United States, but by the 1860s, before the slave trade was abolished in 1808, or the importation of slaves was abolished in 1808. But then by the 1860s, there was about 40 million African Americans in this country. Colonization at large stripped indigenous beliefs and marked tribal religions as pagan. And why this matters to this conversation of the toxic mother-daughter. We look at, every time I talk about the Black woman, I'm a reference now. I done read it a couple times. You know, you read that one document and it changes your whole preview and everything. But Angela Davis's reflections, and also when you couple that with like a Saidiya Hartman's Scenes of Subjection, that the slave home is both a scene for subjugation, right? In that it's still the plantation. Black women on the plantation are still enslaved. And so they are going through a constant subjugation. But the slave home was also a way for Black women to express power by feeding into the gender roles that were represented in the master's home. Because those gender roles that said that the woman took care of the house and all the domestic work would go to a woman, and the care of the household and the care of the children was also a way for enslaved Black women to express a very limited amount of autonomy. This connects to, we read this in the book club, Toni Morrison's Beloved. And there's this whole passage when Big Shug talks about the significance, and also Setha is kind of ruminating about the significance of being allowed to be somebody's mother, of being allowed to care for your children. Black people in the transatlantic slave trade were reduced to flesh. And then because we reduced to that flesh, our flesh becomes commodities. And then because slavery relied on the forced reproduction, that specifically Black women's reproductive systems were capital, and therefore the children they produced were capital. That this idea that even acknowledging though that you are making money by becoming a mother, you are making money for the slave owner, that any opportunity to care for and have a bond or a mothering role with your own biological children was a privilege, because that's often not the experience of Black enslaved women on the plantation. Then that brings me to Hazel Carby's Reconstructing Womanhood. Stick with me here though, because what's so significant about what Hazel Carby talks about is true womanhood, that it was built upon virtues that only white women were allowed to possess. And that is a significant thread, because when we talk about this role of what defines a toxic mother and what we mean when we are suggesting that there's even a toxic dynamic between Black mothers and daughters, is what do we expect? How are we informed of what a mother should be? How are we informed of, what a woman should be? Carby suggests that true womanhood was built on virtues that only white women were allowed to possess. Black women are defined by those who have reproductive organs that can carry children, right? So if a virtue of womanhood is also being a mother, then wouldn't Black women be able to feed into true womanhood? Womanhood in America, gender identity at large in America, is built around a contradiction of setting the white person, whether it's the white man for manhood or the white woman for womanhood, as a normative standard. And everyone who exists outside of that silo of whiteness is considered deviant or other. White women are allowed to be true women, the American ideal of women. Therefore, they are inherently good mothers because they have these virtues of purity, of piousness, of fragility and the soft care that we believe goes into mothering, while we are able to use the ideals of motherhood and womanhood that have been constructed against the Black woman to say that the Black woman should always be used for her labor, that we can then keep her in low roles of domestic work, that we can then say, she should be capable to mother the other children, the white children, but she is incapable of mothering her own children. And this is where we then get to Patricia Hill Collins, who in Black Feminist Thought in chapter 4 talks about the controlling images. And particularly, I want to talk about the controlling images of the mammy versus the Jezebel, where it's another mode of these stereotypes allowing, or these controlling images, as Collins calls them, for Black women's labor to again be controlled. We are simultaneously considered to be consummate mothers. We are overly fertile. We're big. We're boisterous. But we have this inherent ability to mother any child. And both of these constructs also justify like the rape, right? The rape of Black women, which during slavery was utilized for forced reproduction, and then during Jim Crow is used to keep the Black community disenfranchised, right? So this justification that says the rape of Black women can never be seen as the criminal act of rape. Collins' work definitely connects to Hazel Carby, who suggests that the objective of stereotypes is not to reflect or represent a reality, but to function as a disguise or mystification of objective social relations. As Dr. Collins suggests with these controlling images, Carby reaffirms that these stereotypes and these controlling images are used to keep social relations in place. Black women are seen as inherently good mothers who can mother other people's children in low-paying workforce jobs, but they are uniquely toxic as a collective that allows for the various types of disenfranchisement, the being able to criminalize, babes, we get into that, the criminalization of Black motherhood. Kids getting taken away, why they got taken away, vagrancy, your kids wasn't clean, all these different modes that were constantly created because, we wanted to pathologize Black people as a whole, as criminal, and the unique way that we did that for Black women was to criminalize them as mothers. So when we bring that to modern times, how are we informed of what the ideal mother is? How are we informed of what we should be expecting in a mother-daughter relationship? Is the mother toxic as a whole, or does she exhibit toxic behaviors? And I recently did a video, not enough people watched, on how Black women harm Black women and the unique ways that we can interact. And I think that's part of the reason why this return of the request for me to talk about the toxic mother-daughter relationship, because we do understand that there's a unique dynamic in our interactions. And I think the uniqueness also of this toxic mother-daughter relationships relies on how we are able to mask the harm doing. How are we able to mask the harmful behavior, and so that we never have to confront it? Even when I think about the different types of mother-daughter or toxic mother dynamics, a patriarchal understanding of gender that gives all domestic duties to the daughter. And in general, this Western concept of gender identity is harmful to both Black men and womanhood, because as I said earlier, manhood and womanhood were created to represent white men and white women as a normative standard. Another great book to read, The Politics of Parenthood, when you think about this idea that to be a good father is to be a financial provider. But if Black men have largely been historically kept out of the workforce, and therefore financially can't be there for their families, they are immediately told that they are bad fathers. And on the other side, when Black women are pushed into the workforce, but in low labor, in very vulnerable positions within the workforce, because as women, they're capable of being in the house, but they're not allowed to be in their house to properly raise their children. And then the dangers of being a Black woman when your body is still seen as a commodity, and the structure of society says that there is no way that you can be criminally raped, but you are constant threat of rape, of very direct violence to your body. And then we bring those understandings, and then we're trying to then fit ourselves into these gender identities that are constructed by our oppressor. And so we are trying to construct ourselves, and therefore, this is where we get that patriarchy has no gender, and that we are all participating in sort of this patriarchal standard that we bring into the household. And we reinvest in this idea that the women of the household should be doing all the domestic work. And therefore, then the sons should be the financial providers, and they should be told how to, work hard outside the home, even though what are the options outside the home for real? And so then you kind of get this stereotype. Oh man, one of the Colored Museum by George C. Wolfe. So many literary things that inform the way I think, right? But there is, the Colored Museum talks about the 7 tropes of the Negro. Well, to use the term that George C. Wolfe uses, but for lack of a better language, the nigga on the couch role, right? This son who has sort of been coddled, looked at as like the savior of the household who's just stuck on the couch. But when you really interrogate that trope, right, about societally, like what are the societal and cultural phenomena that bring us to this stereotype allowing to exist, it is that we have reinvested in a patriarchal understanding of gender identity that says the woman does the domestic work and the man brings home the financials. And so you are preparing to send your son out into the world, but there is no kind world to send him out to. So you think about this idea, and even then, it's not like en masse the whole Black community got to go up and say, all right, there's abundancy of great jobs. Even still to this day, there is a higher rate of unemployment in our community than any other communities in this country. And it comes down to this historical tradition that is carried through. And no matter how much progression we make as a community, we live in a society that will always quickly realign itself to disenfranchise Black folks. No matter, we get the Voting Rights Act of 1964, and then it's like, all right, well, you can vote, but we're still not going to hire you. And then people start getting jobs, and then the crack epidemic happens. And then we get out of that, and then mass incarceration happens. Then we get out of that, the recession, and now the pandemic. And there's always these cultural phenomena happening that keep Black folks uniquely disenfranchised in American society. And then when I think of other types of toxic mothers, we have the mother that resents how she became a mother. And again, that also goes back to like what was happening. I did a talk with one of my friends on my Patreon where we talked about coming of age, entering into our mid to late 30s and thinking about our own parents and how much we wanted to either move away from who they were as people, or the fears we have of becoming like our parents, or how the various aspects of wanting to embrace, and also how that shaped our own desires to potentially be mothers, or how we go about partnering. And my friend, she's never to me defined her mother outwardly as toxic, but I imagine based on the conversations we have had that she would either say her mother expressed toxic behaviors or that her mother was toxic as a whole, because she was worried about becoming a mother because she didn't want to be the type of mother that her own mother was. And I remember having this conversation with her and saying, have you thought about like why your mother might have been resentful in how she mothered you? Like what might have made her angry? Not to justify, not to minimize the harm that you received, but just to give a preview, like a tread that might make it easier for you to approach the conversation with your mother. Because when we think about our mothers who grew up in the 60s and 70s and even the 80s, and like this historical tradition of Black women being told that our safety, that our ability to access a good life would come through marriage. And we don't live in a society where Black men are allowed to really take the reins of traditional manhood, of true manhood, because of the labor inequality in this country. And so, when we had mothers who thought they were with a good man, and our mothers are pursuing relationships thinking that they have this one type of person who they are having children with, whether they get married or not, and this person ends up being somebody completely different. whether it's because of their own doing or the pressures of the outer world, whatever it is, their life doesn't go the way that they intended it to go. And then they are left being essentially single mothers. And the single Black mother has long been the boogeyman of the Black community. You know, we see it today with the manosphere that has arisen here on YouTube, with this constant messaging that's very derogatory towards the idea of like, ugh, how dare you be a single Black mother? If we still have that sort of messaging in 2022, imagine what it was in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s, and the resentment that Black women would have from being put in that role, even though they in their minds did all the things they pursued a different dream. They pursued a different man. And I'm not saying this to say that you are not allowed to grieve the mother-daughter relationship that you thought you were supposed to have, that you believe that you're supposed to have, because you have every right to have that belief. It's not to say that you are not allowed to process the negative feelings. You are not allowed to confront the harm that was done to you as a child. You know, I'm saying all this with in mind that, you know, one of our most popular reads in the book club was All About Love by Bell Hooks. And chapter 2 is justice, in which she reframes this idea of the justice for children. Because in the hierarchy of society, children are always at the bottom. And if Black women are getting all this trauma thrown on them from the outer world, from their intimate partners, from Black men, who is it then being passed on to? Well, the children. And we overall live in a society that trains us that we are supposed to seek power and domination. You know, you pursue power and domination with people that you believe you have the means to dominate. And people always believe they can dominate children. And so children do often get the shortest end of the stick. We are put in, you know, to think about generational trauma. The person that's going to absorb the most of that is consistently the child. You know, in conjunction with All About Love, we read Heavy by Kiese Layman, which was a really popular book. And it's not about a mother-daughter toxic relationship. It's actually about how Kiese's, like, it's a fictionalized version of his autobiography of how his own mother, who was trying to save him from the outer world, like prepare to send her only son out into the world and want to see him succeed. You know, his college-educated mother, who again did all the right things and ended up being a single Black mother in Mississippi. And how in her trying to save her son and protect her son, she actually passed on trauma to her child, and how that trauma kind of reinvests itself and reappears in Kiese's own relationships with other people. But that book as large, because we read it in conjunction with All About Love, had a lot of Black mothers in the SBG book club taking a step back and reevaluating the different ways that they could uniquely be toxic to their daughters and to their sons, in ways in which they think they are saving their children. And you know, this is why I brought up this whole historical trend, right? We have this idea that the Black woman is always doing the labor, because that's the only way that she gets to show herself as a woman. She's the caretaker at home, she does the domestic work, and because somehow she is inherently good and has this maternal instinct, she can also mother other people's children and, you know, be either in the schoolhouse or be either at the white people's house taking care of their children. And then we get to like respectability politics and this idea that we have to work twice as hard. And there are so many ways that societally the Black community has been informed that punishment is the way we yield success. I've had plenty of conversations in various ways where I've talked about how we have to untether ourselves from the ideas that physical punishment, and that's not even just getting beat, right? Not even just getting whippings or getting spanked or getting hit physically, but all the other ways we enact some sort of punishment, whether it's in our language, withholding love, withholding warmth and compassion, the way we talk to each other, even in the ways that many of you have asked me to approach this topic, the ways in which you might look at your own relationship with your mother and identify these very insipid ways in which you were harmed and toxic behaviors were expressed. But again, to get back to this idea of like how mothers come to resent their role as mothers, Black women were informed that how to achieve safety, right? How to keep themselves away from the violence that they would experience from being raped or from even just ending up in jail. But this idea that your ability to live a safe, happy life relied on you marrying up, marrying the right kind of man. I don't know where this messaging comes from that says that Black women are always encouraged to pick men up. Not that there hasn't been some messaging that says, you should change how you look, right? Because somehow we're being told that like our safety relies on our ability to marry the right kind of man, but then being accused of being gold diggers, even though we're told that we're supposed to marry right in order to live a good life. I don't know why we continue to try to have these conversations and suggest that singular things are happening culturally in our community when there is always a confluence of things happening that are intersecting, that are just rooted in the disenfranchisement and the oppression of the Black community. When I think about parents in the 60s and 70s in particular, I talked about what would essentially be my great grandmothers, who both gave their daughters up to be raised by other people, and them being the first generation to be born free in America. Then you get to myself, like my mom was born in the 60s. My mom would be part of the generation that was the first generation to grow up in desegregated schools, to grow up post the 1965 voting rights, the 65 or 64, the Voting Rights Act. And there was actually, this makes me think of Kamala Harris in the most roundabout way. NPR's Code Switch, the podcast, has a really good episode where they covered the unique politics of Kamala Harris. This is prior to the election, during the election cycle. And they noted that Kamala came up in an era where two enormously consequential phenomena over the last 4 decades was occurring. The rise of a large Black professional class, a Black political elected class on one hand, and the rise of mass incarceration on the other. And it's very telling when they go through this history that Kamala decided, coming straight out of Howard University at a time in the 80s where almost all the roles in the political structure in the municipal level were controlled by Black people in DC, and she decided to become a prosecutor. And I really think that speaks to what I said before, that we live in a time where this idea of punishment is our way towards liberation. What does it mean when that is pointed at children? What does it mean when this sort of idea that punishment and shame are the tools towards liberating your own household, to ending supposedly generational trauma? And what a lot of us have come out of is realizing that that's actually how we continue to pass the trauma along. Another frame of like this toxic mother, in particular to the toxic mother-daughter relationship, is a puritanical approach that believes the female body is inherently sinful. This sort of ultra-Christian, this line of conservative Christianity that is, you go back to like early America, Massachusetts, and the Puritans, and that whole era of burning white women at the stake, and the supposed Salem witch trials and things like that. And you see how like the Bible and Christianity was used to castrate the woman as lascivious for like wearing her hair down or silly things like that. And how has that been absorbed in the Black community, where when we go back to those controlling images, the Mammy versus the Jezebel, where we are inherently good mothers and asexual beings, or we are overly fertile, oozing of sex, we are oozing of this invitation for people to come and control our sex, then what is your response to this? And again, when we think about how Black women have been informed how they can keep themselves safe, on the other hand, if the husband isn't available, if the good man isn't available to make you his wife, you keep your behind in the church. And literally, when we think about the civil rights movement, where were Black people allowed to gather? It was the beauty shop, the barber shop, and the church. And so the church played a large role in shaping Black society. And there is this sort of ideology that's come out, particularly with the rise of like charismatic evangelical Christianity that led to like the Kojic church. Charismatic preaching largely is just considered Pentecostal to begin with, but don't get me to lying, because I'm high key a heathen. I don't be going to church. I just be knowing, what's the popular church up in Greensboro. It begins with an A. It's not Pentecostal. Apostolistic? Yeah, that, okay? And that invests in this idea of the modest woman who should keep her hair a certain way, wear her clothes a certain way. And even though these are not, well, Kojic is black, but apostolistic, any frame of Pentecostal includes, white Pentecostal churches, but how, black people that entered into these religions treated it differently, also as a response to the real life violence and trauma that we experience. When you think about the highest period of domestic terrorism in this country was pointed at African Americans in the 1900s and 1900 through 1930s. We're not that far removed from it, and a lot of our standards around how to keep yourself safe, around how to live a respectable life, around the way you were supposed to move as a woman or the way you're supposed to move as a man are coming out of these eras where the whole slave era was just a level of violence that most of us can never imagine, and then we go straight into domestic terrorism even as free people. The idea is to just think about what this is rooted in, right? Because I also think when we talk about the toxic mother-daughter relationship or the toxic idea of even a toxic black mother in general, that if you are the child in that situation, you should not be walking out thinking that you were the cause, thinking that you were the reason why your mother was the person that she was. You should not take blame for the harm that was done to you. I do think there might be a way to have more understanding, but I actually want that understanding to work for you. Not that I'm trying to absolve your harm doers of any accountability, but I want you to have this understanding because I want you to absolve yourself of having a role in the harm that you experienced in your childhood home. Lastly, the last sort of frame of the toxic mother-daughter relationship is the mother who resents her daughter's image. And oftentimes that's rooted in anti-blackness. Sometimes that can be also just rooted in an anti-blackness that the mother has experienced against her own body. And somehow, in this really distorted way, wanting to beat the possibility of someone else getting to their child first. That they were going to prepare their child for the world by being emotionally abusive, by beating them down. I mean, even if you think of this concept of hazing, that is really one thing that amused me when I went to Howard University was how, as a person who did end up pledging a Black regulatory organization and going through the process, but also just that everything at a HBCU was a pledge process. Everything was a let me beat you down to build you back up. We had to be getting that from our parents' households. This idea that I am going to beat the insecurity out of you so that nobody can tear you down. It's not love. That's another thing that's in All About Love, right? Bell Hooks suggests that most of us have never actually experienced, real love, because if somebody physically or emotionally abuses you, that is not love. Lies to you. That's not love. But when I think about that resenting the daughter's image and that being rooted in anti-blackness, it's colorism, it's fat phobia, it's queer phobia, it's classism. There's all the isms kind of come together. And on one frame, it can be a mother that resents her daughter's image because they see the potential for how her body will be violently treated in the real world. Or also, you resent your child for living in a body that's similar to your own, but having more options for autonomy because society has evolved. That is crazy, babes. That is crazy. And I'm just naming all my favorite reads in the book club. So that really means you need to come join the SPG book club. Come hop on over. All the details are down in the description box. But, man, and this is really, really, if you have not read in a long time and you're looking for an easy, really enjoyable read, The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Disha Falal is a superb audiobook, a superb read in general, and covers so many of these themes about the different frames of toxic mother-daughter relationships that can exist and what that means particularly for the daughter. And it's a really short, it's a 4-hour listen on Audible. So you definitely need to go put The Secret Lives of Church Ladies on your Audible playlist. And if you're new to Audible, remember, you could text Julesy to 500 or use my link audible.com/Julesy. And again, get y'all first one free, okay? Shout out to Audible for even letting me sit here and, have this long ass discussion. Yeah, all those dynamics of like the toxic mother-daughter relationship, or just a toxic Black mother in general, are compounded by the long historical tradition of the Black family being positioned as a savior of the Black community. You know, we have that within Christianity, of the counseling Black women how to get married. Again, that's been a talking point for the past 200 years, babes. None of it is new. Even Black liberation has suggested that the Black family as the center of the community is going to be our mode of liberation, and this nuclear American ideal of the family, and we are actually working to sort of deconstruct. Because, there's a whole conversation about how the nuclear family was reified for the benefits of capitalism. And even when we go back to, that aforementioned, the tribal religions or the ethnic groups that we were pulled from in West Africa, many of them, in not having these Western gender identities, had communal setups where children were raised, and how the community came together with people having individual roles that weren't necessarily prescribed. Oh, and many of these cultures had a communal setup that was constantly there for every stage of your life to help you live. Essentially, we are not people that are meant to only live with one or two family connections or one other person who is our everything and there for every windfall. We are supposed to have a communal setup, but American society has not been structured, or doesn't encourage that sort of that communal building. And it is a lot of hard. We could talk a lot about community, but it is very hard to procure. And many of us that have access to the community come from a very privileged position. But Black liberation definitely has to approach how it has ingested this idea of the nuclear family as a savior. We really have to deconstruct what sort of communal frameworks will really get us to abolishing these oppressive systems of harm. But even more so than that, we really are just now eking out the language and the ability to have these conversations and these tools for us to deal with the trauma that exists in our familial relationships. And many of you will likely face disappointment in trying to approach these conversations with your mother, because it never feels good to be told that you were wrong or that you were the harm doer. I can tell you one thing my mama don't like is even me telling her some things that, have gone wrong in our relationship. Neither of us are perfect. So even though I don't define my mom as toxic or someone who exhibited toxic behavior to me, I still can, I'm in therapy. Things have come up. I've approached my mother. You saying I'm a bad mother? It's like, girl, the whole world finna calm down. The whole world finna collapse. Because you remind your mama of something she did that was not correct. So I know these are not easy conversations to approach. And I know this is very difficult, especially because when I asked who informed us of what we were supposed to expect from our mothers, society still ingests this idea, oh man, Tabitha Brown being everybody mama. Black women are just inherently good mothers. And when you don't have that experience, you feel like something's wrong with you. And then because the Black family has always been uplifted as the savior of the Black community, you are often counseled to not set up boundaries, to not cut off, to stay in harmful relationships with especially your mother. How dare you cut her off, is what people are often told. But we cannot project our own experiences onto other people. If your mental and physical health calls for setting hard boundaries, for cutting off the lines of communications, then you have every right to do so. None of what I've said in this video says that you have to stay in a harmful relationship. But also on the other side of that, don't feel bad for still yearning the love lost in that relationship. As a matter of fact, this is one of the short stories in The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, where a lesbian couple who were both cut off by their families, and one of the women in the relationship, Lily, really yearns for her mother. And it's actually shown through the frame of how we can possibly, as intimate partners, particularly as queer intimate partners, not be understanding of someone else's journey, especially with family who the family cut them off. That just because you went and built your own community elsewhere, you've moved on, doesn't mean that everyone else who shares a similar identity as you has also moved on. And just makes you think about that there's nothing wrong with yearning the love of your mother, even if that's a foreign memory, even if it's not something that you truly saw from your mother. Don't beat yourself up because it takes so much to remove yourself from something that we are societally informed of is supposed to be a natural right of your childhood. All right? It's complicated. Remember, we cannot project our experiences onto others. And if your own safety and well-being says you need to cut it off, says you need to set up hard boundaries, please do what you need to do to protect yourself. But hopefully in having this discussion and doing this video, we can make it easier for you to come into your own understanding, make it easier for you to remove the shame or feeling like you were the cause of the deterioration of your relationship with your parent. And also being able to give some levity to why you experienced the things you experienced. Because there is a unique history that we have experienced. There is a unique way in which the trauma and harm and violence that our community has absorbed show up in the household, show up in the family home. And I think I want to encourage us to keep having these conversations. Thanks for checking in. Thanks to Audible for sponsoring this video and allowing me to make it happen. And I can't wait to see your comments down below. Don't forget, find me on social media or come on over to my Patreon for exclusive content. See you on the other side. Deuces!